Hello and welcome to this next special episode of the Growth Strategist podcast series. I'm delighted to be joined today by Jane Anderson. Jane, how are you?
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's great to see you. And I think we're literally the opposite side of the world. You're 9 hours ahead over there in Brisbane, Australia.
Yes.
Yeah, the magic of technology. So just for the listeners and the viewers, so Jane is one of the world's top 3 branding strategists globally, a Forbes Coaches Council member, thought leadership marketing expert, strategic comms and personal branding expert, and author of 7 books and a keynote speaker. And I've been looking forward to talk to you for a couple of months. So it's a real privilege to speak to you. So maybe, Jane, if you can start by talking a little bit about you, your background, your career, and what you do today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Simon. So my background was I grew up in northern New South Wales in Australia. So if you're thinking, where's that? It's kind of, if you imagine the Gold Coast beaches and Crocodile Dundee type territory, and it's a beautiful part of the world. And but I'm kind of city, a sort of country and beachy sort of lifestyle is where I grew up. So I grew up with a really diverse range of people, because I grew up around a place where we all had it was one school for the 100 odd kilometers, and, real diverse range of people. And so what that meant was that this is long before social media, of course, but what it meant is that people, really worked out your reputation very quickly, because it was a small place. But from there, I did a marketing degree at university, and I remember my second year in uni, and Tom Peters' article came out in Fast Company magazine, which was around this concept of personal brand. And I remember thinking, wow, like imagine if would somebody actually be in the situation where they would say, I'd like a personal brand, please, and here's my credit card. I just was trying to get my head around this. And it was, the future of work and as where we are today. Yeah. But I had the good fortune when I was 14 years old to begin working for a family here in Australia called the Mathers family. Yeah. And the Mathers family started a chain of retail stores here in Australia. And the owner, who became Sir Robert Mathers, was knighted by the Queen. And so again, long before social media, but I really learnt the value of reputation, community, and storytelling. So, a big part of that was the stories that customers had about experiences that they had, things like that. So I grew up working for them from a very young age, from 14 right through till just over after I was around 30 years old. I worked for them. So I was very fortunate, but I went on to work in state government. So I worked as a HR advisor. Right. I went on to work, I was the head of learning and development for a large organisation here of about 10,000 staff, and was looking after the leadership programs for them. And then just really decided, I knew that I always wanted to have my own practice and my own brand. So I started that, left corporate, but started to do a bit of it on the weekends and started coaching people, and then it evolved from there. But since then, so over the last 10 years, I've since really focused most of my time on working with people who are experts in their field and helping them to build that brand. Do a little bit with corporate too, and helping leaders build their brand. Most of my time is with best-selling authors, speakers, consultants, thought leaders. I was on faculty in Thought Leaders Business School here for 7 years. And so now we're in this interesting time where we have, all the barriers are removed to building a personal brand now. Yes. So that's where I spend my time now.
Wow. Okay. And so that's fascinating. And the whole area of personal brand for me is really interesting, because I've gone through a personal journey as well. I mean, if you look at my LinkedIn, I've got a solid, I've been a commercial lawyer in Australia, UK, Ireland, in the States. I work for big tech companies. I've had that corporate career, but like you, I always wanted to have my own business and my own brand. And so over the last 7 years, I've created my own coaching, consulting, training, etc. business. But it's only this year that I've nailed down a brand, and I'm referred to as the growth strategist. And that was, I actually democratized that through a number of people. So there was a scientific exercise in that, and I've seen a real improvement in, not just raw numbers, but also the quality of people I'm talking to. And
right.
so there's a real, would you say there's a real science to this? I mean, when a client comes to you, right, and says, I need
Yes.
help with my personal brand, how do you start? Where do you start?
Yeah, great question. And I think it's as much a science as it is an art.
Yeah.
As you would know. So, where I typically start, it depends on where they are. So sometimes they're at the beginning of their journey. So sometimes they're coming out of corporate, they've never built, and we're talking about building a brand that's yourname.com. So building a leadership brand within an organization is a little bit different. But if they're wanting to build their personal brand, their name.com, if they're starting out, there's a few things that I typically look for. So I'm looking for what's the area of expertise that they have, and sometimes they have a variety, of expertise, and so we've got to really narrow down into what are the messages that they know how to tell and how to get out there. The second part is who are the markets that they know how to work with. And that will need that help. And the third part is the modes of delivery. So once we know those three things, and there's a series of exercises we do, but that's really the heart of what we're looking for is what are the programs they can deliver. Then we look for what is really the overarching key message of that brand. And then the other thing I'm usually looking for is their worldview. So their worldview is typically part of the essence of the brand. It's not something that's always very explicit. It won't necessarily be in any marketing or any comms, but it's more about the essence and the energy of the person. And that part is really the magic. That's their X factor. And it's hard to replicate. And so that really creates the uniqueness of that brand is typically what I'm looking for is where we start.
And so that's really interesting, that uniqueness, because when I went through that exercise of the growth strategist, I don't know, but you might say, because I've had I've spoken to similar people like you in the States, and there's an argument to be said, it's a bit too generic, right? What does growth mean? And I do get that. But I operate through 4 prisms of growth: business growth, leadership growth, brand growth, and mindset growth. And I deliver it through various different mechanisms, coaching, consulting, training, and I have different types of clients. So I'm okay squeezing it under that umbrella of growth because I'm getting the business. But I can understand, to maybe an expert like you, it might be too generic, but I'm okay with it. But what is it about that personality, that uniqueness in a client do they know it, or do you know it straight away, or do you have to work together to squeeze that out? What's the kind of process around that?
Yeah, there's a few things. That one is, I guess, from doing this work for so many years, you kind of pick up on it fairly quickly. But one of the things I have to do is keep a really open mind and not assume too much. So as I'm sure you do. So I will often sort of make some notes, and they're things that I'm seeing immediately, because they're the things that quite often clients will see easily. And but it could be that there's parts of their personality that need to just come out a little bit more, and it might not be coming out enough just yet. So there's a few activities that I get them to do. I'm looking typically for usually a pattern or a series of, quite often it's a pattern or series of events that have happened over their life. And it will be, that activity will often help me to understand where this essence is coming from. And so once we can work that out, we don't actually make that too explicit until usually the brand has evolved. So we'll focus very much on what will be commercially smart for some time until we know that the brand isn't at risk by starting to elevate the messaging. So we just have to be quite careful about that. Sometimes we can, sometimes I find some clients kind of want to run with that a little bit too early. And so we say, we're just got to be patient. We'll come with that. We've got to just make sure we've got some revenue coming in first, and that you actually have a roof over your head, and just making sure that we're always staying very commercially smart and doing, we've got a very specific sequence of activities for the growth. So we know what we're doing at 100,000 in revenue, we know what we're doing. At 200,000 in revenue, we know what we're doing at each of those revenue points. And that's the filter that we're making those decisions through to make sure that that essence doesn't, it will always be there, because it's the bit that people want to buy you. They want to become you. And that's actually the unconscious thing they're really buying. So I say people are really buying your perspective more than your program. And when they connect with that, it's, you've got the magic.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And it's kind of like, how do I put this? There's 7.5 billion people out there. And I don't know, there's a few billion on the internet. And we're all watching global gurus and thought leaders. And I've interviewed, I think I've interviewed about 40, right? And amazing people. And yet I also coach and mentor a lot of business people as well. I've started mentoring a businesswoman in India yesterday. She connected with me on LinkedIn, right? And we were talking about her brand, and I'm not a branding expert, but I know enough. And what I'm noticing is that this whole lockdown year, right? This circuit breaker year, I think it's allowing more people to connect with other influential people than ever before, right? And I think that is going to really whip up the whole brand market. And for people like you, I think it's going to be much more work, much busier, much more interesting, and probably quicker. What do you think about how this circuit breaker of a year is going to change the whole personal brand dynamic?
Yeah, I think if you look back, I always sort of go, well, what was the context of leading up to this, and what was happening that created the amplification of what's happening, so that we know, okay, well, what does that mean? So if we go back to, even if we look back at, say, 2015, in Fast Company, Dr. Graham Codrington was interviewed, who is a futurist. And back then he said, if you look at academia, if you look at the future of work is really about building your personal brand. And he said, but the personal brand all sounds lovely, but there's a lot of self-leadership, self-management, administration, communication, marketing, all the stuff that comes with all that. So there's a capability around that doesn't, always necessarily come easily to people, particularly, for when you're on your own. Yeah. So as a result, I think coming out of 2015 off the back of GFC, was where I saw probably the biggest shift starting there. So I was still doing this work back in 2009. Yeah. And then, so coming off the back of that, all that meant is that platforms were easier to access. So you could start to build personal brand. Then you have an event like this year that hits. And suddenly, I think in the lead up to now there was a group of people who have been doing this for some time. And there's that they've kind of gone, oh, you know what, this is this amplification that this is now creating for me to be able to amplify all the channels that I'm using, or shift. If I've been doing corporate training, now I'm shifting into virtual training. You can see my own studio. I'm normally on stage, as I've set up my own studio, which is a stage now. So there's those people who've been doing, it probably had a bit of momentum and made the shift and amplifying that and moving very quickly. Then there's, I think, another group who, you've got people who sometimes have been forced into building their own brand. They haven't necessarily got work, and they've gone, you know what, I'm going to start a podcast. Or I'm going to start a YouTube channel. I've been thinking about doing this for ages. So I think this second wave of people coming through, but it's I think the big difference has made people realize is that is accessibility. I can access different markets, access different people. We've gone, most of my work was local. I had a few clients overseas, but now we have specific programs for I run on Australian and New Zealand time. Then we have another one that runs on Singapore and Perth time. We have another one that runs now on UK time, another one that runs on US time. So going deep, I think, in IP, but now diversifying across countries, because how COVID has affected Australia is quite different to the US, which is quite different to the UK. So diversifying and managing risk around income streams, and not on mode of delivery, but the countries, and going deeper on expertise, I think, is what we're seeing.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I'm witnessing that myself as well. And
Are you?
yeah, absolutely. And I've moved, a bit like you before this year. Nearly all of my coaching, consulting, training, lecturing work was face to face. And this year, since March, I've only done one face to face thing, and it's all been online and online coaching, training, etc. But
right.
what I wanted to talk about really was then to pivot onto companies. So I talk about when in my various training exec ed programs, I talk about the 3 R's of business: risk, revenue, and reputation. That's what I talk about: risk, revenue, reputation. And really, they are the 3 things. In fact, I came up with that when I worked with BHP in Australia, when I had to present a paper and I came up with risk, revenue, reputation. And so for me, reputation for a company is basically the brand, right? That's what the brand is. And historically, corporates, because I represent a company called Brand Finance over here in Europe. They're the world's biggest independent brand valuation agency, and they have a presence in Australia as well. And traditionally, companies have kind of not really put brand at the core of their C-suite. They've kind of seen it as an expense. But increasingly, brand as a strategic driver of value in a business is getting more and more important. Are you seeing this whole area of corporate brand becoming taken more and more seriously? Are you seeing that, or what are your observations about corporate brand?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and because you probably see, and I think you're spot on with your model around risk, revenue, and reputation. Reputation is really all driven, as you would know, by trust. And so we look at if you're coming, like, I think what happens is when you're coming through, reasonably good times, your brand is always at risk. So you've always got to make sure, you obviously have those, plans in place. But then you come into a time where, something like this hits, and then you go, okay, we're in crisis management, and we're trying to deal with the crisis of revenue, crisis of losing staff, crisis of trying to retain customers, all that stuff. So suddenly reputation becomes so valuable. But I don't know if you see this, but what I find is planning for the unplanned that is often missed. So for example, if you look at, here in Australia, a great case study that I shared in a blog a few years ago was, we have a big theme park here on the Gold Coast called Dreamworld.
I've been there.
And you've been there, you've been on probably the Rapids and the Thunderbolt and all that sort of stuff. So 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, now, if you think about Dreamworld, place of dreams, it's like Australia's Disneyland, if you like, and really strong. Always had a really strong brand, and but 4 people were killed on the Rapids ride.
I remember that
a few years ago. You might remember, and so it was a case study in what not to do as a result of that. Brand, as in even the board, the reputation of the board, how it was managed. Compassion for families, all that sort of stuff, and they've got a lot of they're recovering, but when you go back to the it came back to safety and compliance, and really is again just coming back to, if what would be the impact if lives were lost, what would happen, and what's the risk that's associated with all these things. And like you said, risk is absolutely connected to reputation. So I'm a big fan of risk management. And I think what happens with organizations, they get so caught up in, and when I work with leaders, they're caught up in the here and now, the today's problems, the time that they're trying to just do more with less and cope day to day, but not taking the time to think, well, what would happen if this happened, and what strategies do we have in place to really maintain and manage the brand if something did go wrong. And I get you can't think of every possibility, but if you've got systems and the right people in place, then just to be able to really think about what could go wrong, your brand is in a much better position to be able to do that. And no doubt that's all your genius and the amazing work you do.
Thanks. No, thanks. No, yeah, absolutely. It's a real balancing act for corporates. And when I talk
Really
about
is.
that triangle of risk, revenue, reputation, I also talk in terms of a three-legged stool, right? You know, the three-legged bar
Yeah,
stools. And if you just focus on revenue and the other two legs are shorter, it's going to topple over. So you have to manage it
absolutely.
equally. So, so just, I mean, in the last couple of minutes, in terms of personal brands for people, you know, given I talk about, I think there's going to be kind of like a post-COVID wave, right? I think the world, I mean, there'll always be rogues and there'll always be people who think like the old way, but I do think there'll be more sensitivity in the world. I do think sales is going to become more about providing value and building relations. And I think I'm hoping the world gets a little bit more sensitive, right? Assuming that's correct, what do you think? How do you think the personal brands going forward might need to change? Do you think anything people need to really think about their brand a little bit smarter, given the sensitivities in the world now?
I think there's a couple of things on this, Simon. I reckon for organizations to think about leveraging the personal brand of their leaders.
Yeah.
So in other words, you know, because you got access coming out of COVID, you got access to an extraordinary talent pool. There's a lot of people who are unemployed. So you got the best talent pool you'll have seen for a long time. So the ability to position your leaders, one of the pieces of work I've been doing is working with organizations who struggle in the past to get great talent. So like mining and energy and things like that, where they're just not getting the results on traditional job sites to try and find talent. But now to go, okay, you've got access to great talent. So the edge will be the reputation of not only the brand, but the impact of what is the reputation of the person I would be working for. So, you know, and there's a lot of opportunity, I think, in the leaders brand. So we do a bit around that because we know that 75% of job seekers will validate, jump on LinkedIn, have a look at, because they only got to have a look at the job ad and who's doing it, and go on LinkedIn and they contact who have we got in common. And they say, you know, what's this bloke like to work with? Is he any good, or is she any good? Should I work there? So, I think there's an opportunity for organizations to leverage their leaders and not just in their personal brand, but in their thinking. So their thought leadership and being able to, you know, one of the things we do is even for CEOs is leveraging LinkedIn profiles and things like that to say, well, you know, shine the light, show the vision. Where are you trying to go? Don't put your profile up like an obituary. You know, if I read it out loud, it'd sound like I'm at your funeral. Inspire people so they go, wow, I'd love to work there. That sounds amazing. I want to be part of that. So I think there's an opportunity to leverage personal brand as part of business brand. So that's some of the work I do. And I think there's and humanizing the brand. So it's not just about where you're going to come and do work. This is where you're going to feel like you belong. And a big part of that is how do we create that? People have fundamentally that sense of wanting to feel like they belong somewhere. We know that's the number one driver for people feeling like they belong as part of the brand. We know that's for customers, but for how leaders can do that. And then for personal brands, the next step is for those who have built their own consultancy practices. The challenge now for them is how you're going to retain your customers, but create communities and tribes so that you have customers for life, as opposed to just transactions is the challenge that I pose them.
I think what you've just said there is genius, and it actually sums up the journey I've gone through. And, you know, I've noticed my followers have trebled this year in the last 6 months. And also I'm noticing, and I'm still the same Simon, right? I still have the same blue chip corporate background. The only difference was about March this year, I started working with an online Twitter expert, and she said exactly the same. Her name is Sam Kelly here in Ireland. It's called the Tweeting Goddess. I'll connect you to, because I think you're very similar. And
thank you.
And she runs this group called the Women's Inspire Network, right? So I'll connect you.
Cool.
But she said the same thing. She said, Simon, you've got this really amazing corporate background. You've written books. You've been an executive, but it's kind of your profile's a little dull, and also you're not. She knows that I've had some tragedies in life, etc. And you need to start telling this stuff, Simon. Start being honest, attached to people's hearts. And so, but don't do it in an egotistical way. So that's what I've done. And I've noticed it's culminated in, for example, right? yesterday I had this conversation with this new client in India, and she said to me, Simon, I'm just amazed at how you've accelerated so quickly in the last 6 months. So the point is, people are watching.
Notice.
People are watching this stuff.
Yes.
That's the point. And that's what you were saying.
Yeah.
So, and I guess what you were also saying was that people like to belong. So she feels she belongs to my journey because she's going on a similar journey, right? So it's a fascinating area. So just to conclude, if you could go back to a younger version of you and whisper 2 or 3 words of wisdom in that younger version of yours is to set you up for a successful life, a personal successful brand, what 2 or 3 things would you say to that younger version of you?
The first thing that I would say is lead a tribe and worry less about transactions, which is the message I have for a lot of people now. And I wish I knew that a lot earlier than I discovered. That fast tracks everything. The other thing I would say is get the right people around you. So get the right advisory board. Whilst you're leading a tribe in a community, you also need your own tribe. So I wish I got that a lot earlier than I did. And they're probably, if I said those 2 things that are really things that we don't necessarily understand as part of building a brand and part of, that and building a practice. And I think those 2 things is, if I knew those much earlier and understood what they meant, it would have saved me a lot of grief.
Yeah, no, I agree. I 100% agree with both of those. So I've really enjoyed this chat. It's been too fast. And how do people find out more about you and your work and connect with you?
Oh, thanks, Simon. I've really enjoyed our catch up too. It's been wonderful to spend time with you. So if they want to connect, you're welcome to. I'm on all the platforms, so LinkedIn and Facebook and all that sort of stuff, and Instagram. So you're welcome, and Twitter, of course. So you're welcome to reach out. Feel free to connect so that you listen to the conversation. Don't be shy. That would be great. Don't be afraid to say hi.
Don't be afraid to say hi. And thanks so much. It's been really wonderful. And thanks for your time. And I know we'll keep in touch because I've got a few projects I'd like to talk to you about afterwards. So thanks very much for your time. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Simon.
Bye
Bye for now.
Bye. Bye.